Okay, so I think everybody's probably joined now. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Jo. I am one of the senior consultants with Ten2Two. Have been with the business for about 6 or 7 years now, and can tell you now I've seen all sorts of things happen between job offer and job start. So hopefully today is going to be really useful for a lot of you. I'm guessing that you're joining because you've either got a recruitment process underway, maybe you've even made that elusive offer, found that perfect candidate, and you are aware of the fact that just because you've made the offer doesn't always guarantee that the person's going to be there on that start date. But hopefully, if you follow our top tips, we'll be able to mitigate any unfortunate circumstances. As I said to start off with, we're going to be sending out the slides and a handout at the end of this, so you don't need to furiously make notes. And of course, if anyone does have any questions or queries, we can have a bit of a Q&A at the end, or you can contact Deborah or myself or any of our colleagues at any point to have a further conversation. The sales pitch in there as well. Of course, if you need any help recruiting, we're the place to come. So sit back, relax, and I'm going to hand over to Deborah O'Sullivan, our MD, to tell you all about turning a job offer into a job start.
Thanks, Jo. Welcome, everybody. Lovely to see so many of you. The goal of this session really is to just share some of our experience on the best way to create and present an offer to a candidate, and then manage that process so that they actually do join you. We hope you'll pick up some really useful tips, practical things that you can use whenever you're recruiting, whether that's now or in the future. So let's just take a quick look at what we're going to cover. This is a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So if you do have anything that you want further information on, as Jo said, just get in touch. So we're going to look at the current candidate market, how that impacts the process of recruitment, what a job offer should look like, then how to manage that notice period between making the offer and your candidate starting, a very quick summary, some examples, and then a Q&A. So what's going on in the candidate markets? I'm sure you probably know, but if you don't, the latest ONS figures show vacancies remain higher than employment, which is, as everyone knows, at historic lows. So basically, the number of workers is restricted, and it's still really difficult for companies to be hiring. There's more than 3 in 4 of businesses are saying they're finding difficulty finding the talent they need. And small businesses in particular are saying recruiting staff with the right knowledge and skills is second only to the issue of rising costs. So that shows how big an issue it is amongst particularly small, medium businesses. So what does this mean for recruiting? It means you need a different approach to the market. Recruiters and hiring managers just can't rely on what they've always done. They need to find new ways to find these elusive candidates. So passive candidates are becoming a really big deal. That's someone who's not actively seeking. They're not on job boards every day. They're not checking out LinkedIn. They think they're perfectly happy in their job. But actually they're the type of candidate that you can seek out for a perfect role. They are quite hard to attract, and they are also harder to persuade to move, but often they will be the person you're looking for. It means from a company point of view, your brand is hugely important, and how you pitch and sell the role is important. So you have to view every element of the recruitment process as a selling opportunity for why a candidate should want to work for you. And even if the candidate's not successful, it doesn't matter. It means they'll have a great experience with you. They'll sell your brand to other people and potentially other new employees. Use experts, as Jo said, you know, in tough times like this, actually going to people who do this stuff day in, day out is often the way to go. We work with candidates every day, hundreds of them, and we know lots of tricks of the trade to find, hopefully, the unicorn candidate you might be looking for. We appreciate that's not always possible for everybody, but sometimes there's a point when you have to go, okay, I need some help here. It goes without saying, make the role as attractive as possible. But candidates today are looking for so much more than salary. So you really want to be thinking about what is it that a person who's going to go for your job might be looking for, whether it's flexibility, staggered hours, extra annual leave. It's not always about the salary, but what you want to make sure you're doing is benchmarking against what else is out there, because if you go out to market with too low a salary, then you really won't get any applicants at all, or you'll get the wrong type of applicants. But you want to make sure you're presenting a whole package that's attractive. And then there's an appreciation that you might not have the luxury of a comparison, a group of candidates to compare. So you might find the absolutely ideal candidate, perfect fit, perfect match in cultural and skills, but they're the only candidate you've got. Now, we wouldn't necessarily recommend short-circuiting the process, but in today's market where it's moving really, really quickly, if you find your ideal candidate, we would say don't hesitate in the current climate. Maybe supplement your recruitment process with some like psychometrics or an additional step with that one particular candidate. But the danger is if you hang about, you'll lose them if you're just hanging about for a comparison. And I think, Jo, you had this quite recently, didn't you?
Yeah, we've had real life examples relatively recently where employers have, completely understandably so, been looking for somebody to compare their preferred candidate against, where we've had the privilege of working with them and have submitted somebody who we're very, very keen on. The client has really liked them. They've ticked the large majority of the boxes, but they've only seen one candidate. Again, completely understandably, they've wanted to try and assess the market further and find somebody to compare and contrast against this one candidate. But 3 weeks later, they still hadn't found anybody they felt stepped up to the mark and on paper. And in that gap, the first unicorn candidate, as Deborah said, found another role and accepted it elsewhere, and they were back to square one. So although it is difficult, and I know a lot of clients, and I've sat on the other side of the fence and I've been exactly the same, want to be able to make sure they're going through a robust process, and part of that process they feel needs to be a comparison. As Deb said, in today's market, sometimes it ends up being detrimental to the success of the process.
Absolutely. And what I would say there is, of course, you can always take references. So if you haven't got a comparison, but you think it's the right candidate for you, then you can take references, deep references, to make sure you think they really are right for you, rather than hesitating and maybe losing the candidate. So what else does it mean, this mad candidate market? Well, it means you need a more effective recruitment process. And actually, I say a more effective recruitment process. This is the recruitment process we would recommend, whatever the climate is, but it's even more important in today's climate. So the first thing is a clear brief and a clear advert. So you want to be making sure up front you really do know the scope of the role, the responsibilities, the salary range you're prepared to go to, and what other benefits are going to be included in what the end package will look like. Whether you're briefing a recruiter or doing it yourself, you want to relay that into an advert that sells the company, sells the role, and is very clear. And I would always say, include a salary. You'll get a much better response from candidates if you include a salary, even if it's a range or a circa. It just saves everybody a whole lot of wasted time than if you put competitive. As I say, the advert is a chance for you to sell your brand and the company. So make sure you always include something upbeat and appealing about your company and the role. And then outline the expected process. So this might be through your recruiter, or it might be through your hiring manager. But once you've started engaging with candidates, let them know whether it's a 1-stage, 2-stage, 5-stage process, so that they know what to expect. You need to manage expectations all the way through the process, which leads on to reducing delays between the stages. So once you've closed your application date, get interviews arranged quickly. Once you've found your candidate, make the offer quickly and get the contract issued. promptly. So all of those stages, if you put weeks of delay in, then you're likely to lose candidates in that process. If you can't avoid delays, then let the candidates know. So if a key decision maker is away or something's come up operationally, which meant, you know, you had to put the recruitment process on hold, just let them know, because actually what you see is candidates holding off for jobs they're really keen on. They will hold off other offers or going for other interviews, in fact, if they know what the status is. So yeah, just keep candidates informed. Offer prompt feedback to candidates post-interview. Now, even if they're a reject, I hate using that word, but, you know, even if it's an unsuccessful candidate, let them know quickly. It's so much kinder, and actually it helps your brand positioning by being professional, efficient. So even if they're not successful with you, at least they won't be saying bad things about you behind your back. Create a dialogue directly with your candidates, either through a recruiter or through your hiring manager. This is really important when you get to the negotiation point. The more you know those candidates, the easier it is to understand their drivers, you know, what might tip them over into accepting an offer or walking away. At every stage, whether it's just an invite for an interview or even a sorry, you know, your CV's not quite what we're looking for, just show you value candidates and their time. It's from this side of the fence, you will know that recruiting is a big overhead for a business, time and money, but equally it is also a big commitment from the candidates. So it's just nice to be able to show you value their candidates and their time, even if it's a little line in an email. It's that brand positioning again that shows that you're considerate. And then set standards and prioritize the process. And this always makes our clients laugh, but because clients come to us and they're so madly busy they need to recruit, and then they can't find the time to engage in the recruitment process. So what we would say is, you know, if you're using a recruiter, then most of the hassle's taken away from you, but you do need to make time to look at CVs and attend interviews. So once you press the button on a recruitment process, diarise some time, make sure you are available for the process, because otherwise you're just going to delay the whole thing and in the end probably extend the whole process. Which means that someone to help you out is going to be starting later than you'd like. If you're an HR manager and you're reliant on other decision makers in the business, then set some standards everyone can agree to. You know, we will always review CVs in 2 days. We will always make our diaries available for interviews, whatever works in your organisation, but try and get people to commit to the process. So again, once you press the button, people are engaged and they know they have to move fast. And then I liked this stat that I found in research. It was from some LinkedIn research where it says on average, 55% of candidates believe it should take less than 2 weeks from first interview to a job offer. I mean, that is really ambitious. You know, we probably would say 4 weeks is a good, strong process that's gone very smoothly. But it just shows you where candidates' heads are in this sort of fast click, click, click world. They just expect stuff to happen instantly. So once you've got that as an expectation, you can see why the speed of the process becomes important.
And just a note on that as well is to be aware that other clients or other businesses and other employers sometimes can move faster. So again, that dialogue with your either agent or with the candidate directly, trying to encourage an openness about other processes that they're in, so that if needs be, your process can flex or speed up to try and stay in line with other processes they may be in. Again, we wouldn't want you to shortcut any of your set processes. If you do have a process that you'd like to follow, but we also don't want you missing out on the candidate just because somebody else moved faster.
Yeah, absolutely, Jo. So that's a sort of state of the market and what it means in terms of recruitment. So let's say you've now found, you've been through that chunky bit in the middle, which is the interviews, and you've decided who your perfect candidate is. So we move on to the job offer. So the next slide, I'm going to talk about the actual details of a job offer. But just up front, there's some things to chat around, which is, you know, who are you going to recruit? So what the ideal situation is always that you get to your preferred candidate and you've got a second in reserve, because actually that's the most efficient way actually to get someone in post. But you'll generally have a preferred candidate. And some of the negotiations we have with clients about candidates is, what is it that works for the role? So you might find, hopefully, the perfect match, which is they've got a cultural fit, a personality fit, they've got all the functional skills, and they've done the job before. So tick, 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 perfect. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And so you have to start thinking about, do I want to compromise, and what will I compromise on? And what we would say here is that actually, if something is trainable or could be supplemented, then you go with a candidate who's got the things that can't be trained. So it could be a piece of experience they've got, it could be their personality fit, the cultural fit. So if someone's perfect, but there's some admin in the role, but they're not a very good administrator, could you support them with a part-time administrator that means they're perfect for the role with a bit of support? Or I'm trying to give another example where perhaps they are a perfect fit, apart from they can't use the software you've just installed and spent a fortune on. That's easily trained. That wouldn't be a reason for, in my book, to turn a perfect candidate away, because you can easily train that part of the job. So what I would say is keep an open mind when you've got candidates in front of you. Don't always think there's someone better who can be a complete 100% fit. There's often things that you can find to supplement somebody who otherwise is a perfect fit. And then when you're putting together the offer, what I would always recommend is that you do a complete package. So don't just think it's salary and hours, or just salary. Try and package it all up with a ribbon so that it looks like a really strong offering on paper. So always include your annual leave. I'll go on to this in the next slide, but just make sure it's a whole package when you make the offer. And then the how, we always would make a verbal offer first on the phone. So if we can't get hold of a candidate, we wouldn't leave a message. We would say, please call the office, because at that first point when you make that offer is a fantastic way to gauge whether that candidate is likely to accept or not. You can tell immediately if they're delighted, if they're thinking, if they've got to plan some stuff, whether they need to go talk to their partner. So it's really important, I think, to make the offer the first time on the phone, and preferably with somebody, as we said earlier, who's already got a rapport. So whether that's the recruiter, the hiring manager, the recruiting manager, somebody who knows a little bit about the candidate. And then the best approach from there on, once you've made that verbal offer, would be to immediately follow up on email with details of the offer. You'd be surprised how many people put the phone down going, I didn't think that was real, because they are so taken aback that they've been offered, and it throws all sorts of things up for them in terms of thinking what they've got to do next. So follow up really quickly with an email outlining the whole package. And then what I would say is just expect a dialogue, whether you call it negotiation or not, but there will be a dialogue of some kind after you've made that initial offer. So I would say, I don't know, Joe might pull me up here, but about 30% maybe, if you've managed the process well up to the point of offer, so they know what the salary and hours and everything is, about 30% are, yep, straightforward, fantastic, yes, issue the contract. But the rest, there's normally some type of discussion.
I'd say at the moment it's probably higher than the 70% where there's some sort of discussion, just because of the freneticness of the market. But yeah, 30% with well-managed processes will get a resounding positive response.
So after your dialogue, hopefully they will accept. There might be some compromise on both parts. And then as soon as possible, I keep saying this, I know, but as soon as possible, issue a formal offer letter with somewhere for them to sign, or a contract if you're that efficient. The signing on a piece of paper actually means the candidate has thought about it. It speeds up the process. It means they can resign sooner, which means they can start sooner. So the sooner you can formalize it, the better. And then, as I touched on, try in this process to remember the psychology of this, which Often candidates don't quite realise that they haven't quite thought deeply enough about the job until it's presented to them as an offer. So you can get candidates who go a bit wobbly, they start worrying whether they can do the job, or they worry about handing in their resignation, because that's never a fun thing to do. So it's just worth keeping that in the back of your mind. So if somebody behaves slightly hesitantly at the point of that initial offer, it's not necessarily saying they're not keen. It might be that they've got other stuff going on in their head, and actually they're super keen, they just need to do some processing first. So what would we see in a job offer? I'm not going to go through all of this because most of it's pretty obvious, but there's a few things I did want to touch on. So when I talk about the whole package, this is what I mean, which is you want to try and get down on that initial conversation as much detail as possible without it becoming laborious. So job title, obviously. If you're doing anything other than full-time hours, then we would always recommend you quote the full-time salary and then the part-time salary. Contract type, so permanent or full-time, permanent, part-time, contract, temp. And then specify working hours, working pattern, and your standard working week. And the reason I put this in here, and of course we're experts in flexible and part-time working, so this is core to us. But as more and more people maybe do reduced hours, you know, times are hard, it saves some money on budget, it becomes really important. So whether you work a 37.5 standard week, or maybe a 40-hour week or a 35-hour week, that affects the actual salary of a part-time worker. So it's important to know that if you're looking at the part-time market. Location. I mean, that, Joe, you're going to jump in here, aren't you? I mean, location has become a really big issue since the pandemic.
Yeah, and Deb and I talked about this the other day. We could probably and may well do a session entirely dedicated to hybrid, remote, all of the other buzzwords that there are at the moment, making sure throughout your whole process and very specifically outlined in this offer where you expect the person to be and when, in as much detail as possible, and for it not to be a surprise. So none of this should be a surprise to the candidate, but this location piece specifically at the moment, because of what a hot topic it is, should be something that's thought about in advance and discussed very openly with the candidate, because it's so different for everybody at the moment, every business and every individual, and there are so many different combinations of working now that it really can be key to their decision making.
Yes, and we've seen people walk away from brilliant offers because they couldn't compromise on the number of days working from home or the number of days hybrid. So you're absolutely right. So it's really important, and to be as open-minded as you can. I guess I'm going to talk about this in a sec, but that would be the other thing, to see if you can be more flexible at the point when you enter that dialogue. So yeah, and then the other things are pretty obvious. You know, a start date, what annual leave allowance there is. Sorry, I should have put on that example pro rata. I've just realised. And then what your probation period is, because actually sometimes that could become a key thing in the negotiation. So the more things you put here, these are all your touch points for negotiation. Sorry. Including your benefits. So you got your job offer. Hopefully you've got an excited candidate. What are the common sticking points we see? So on the left are the things that are in your control, and on the right, not so much. So if we just touch on them individually, salary is the obvious one. What we would say here is just make sure you've benchmarked your salary so that you're confident in the value you're associating to the job. And if the candidate is asking for more salary, but you have no more budget available, then you could look at benefits. And, you know, lots of candidates are looking for additional flexibility, reduced hours, and more annual leave, or even financial help with sort of traveling or training. So they're all things that people consider to be financial, but don't actually hit the pay budget. Flexibility, as I say, this is just huge, and I can't see it going away anytime soon. Pre-pandemic, there was always a bit of a gap between what candidates really wanted and what clients or employers were able to offer. The gap has just widened since the pandemic, where candidates' expectations are off the page in terms of the flexibility they'd really like. And employers, as Joe said, everybody has a different idea about what flexibility now means. So if your candidate is asking for more flexibility or different locations, all we would say is you might not have thought about it, but consider it. Just don't dismiss it out of hand, because it could work. You know, most employers now have some working from home, and they see increased productivity, loyalty, better morale. So, and actually, if somebody's asking for reduced hours, particularly if it's only by maybe a day, you know, we often see full-time roles being advertised for candidates asking for 4 days or maybe 32 hours, something like that. Actually, that saves you pay budget, and you've still got the role covered. So it's something worth considering, even if you haven't thought about it up front. Obviously, you have to keep in mind your other staff and whether that would create any internal issues for you, because what you don't want to do is bring someone new in and the rest of your team be saying, well, why have they got this, that and the other? So obviously keep that in mind. Bonus and on-target earnings. Bonus doesn't really come up because it's normally discretionary, and most people understand that. On-target earnings, we see this with sales roles in particular, and normally all the discussion is around is, how is it working? You know, what's the incentive scheme set up? So make sure before you make an offer, you know what that is. And then you might want to think about, this is where we see this being negotiated, is if a candidate wants it to be uncapped. And normally there's no loss for you because you get extra revenue in return for an uncapped bonus. So it's giving something to the candidate actually, but it helps you, it's beneficial for you. Equally, job title is another one we do see candidates often negotiating and saying, can it be called something else? And that's often because they don't want to change their level on their CV. Just generally, it's often because they think the job is worth a higher job title. And what I would say, unless you've got a really strict hierarchy within your organisation, then it's an easy win to change someone's job title, have a discussion about it, agree on it, just making sure you're not ruffling any feathers internally. Annual leave, again, this falls into the flexibility discussion. Lots of people are saying, actually, I've had more annual leave than that before, or I want some more annual leave than that. Again, if you've got a very strict policy, then clearly a new joiner isn't going to get any different treatment, but you could offer the opportunity for unpaid leave, and often that will be enough for a candidate to go, yeah, great, that's fine, I don't mind if it's unpaid as long as I can have the time. Notice period, I just put in here because often if someone's on a long notice period, they might have some stored annual leave that they could use to bring their start date forward. So it's always worth asking, you know, what is your notice period? Can you negotiate to make sure they can start with you sooner? And that obviously helps the next phase of this process, which is you're not having to manage them in that notice period. And then benefits. Normally,
just on that note, Deb, we're starting to run out of time, so we may need
okay.
to move on a little bit faster.
Okay, sorry.
People from their lunch.
Okay, all I was going to say about benefits is normally people don't negotiate benefits in our experience. So looking on the other side of the slide, counter offers and other offers. We are seeing counter offers, and this is where you just have to think about, how much do I want this candidate? What's the cost of not getting this candidate in terms of time and money? Am I prepared to match? And all I would say here is that you know, sometimes it's a really easy match. And if we try and remind the candidates, if they are being countered, why they initiated their search in the first place, because if it was cultural or workload, none of that's going to change, even if their current employers offered them more money. But if they love their job and they just needed more flexibility and they've now been offered it, likely they're going to stay. So you sort of just need to know if you're beaten or not at that counter offer stage and how far you're prepared to go. And the same on other offers, really. And what I would say is just make sure you know where your boundaries are. And when you've made your final offer, make it clear that is your final offer, because then both sides know whether to walk away or not. In my head, if you've got to this point with a candidate, it's worth that extra mile to try and make it work, unless you're getting wrong vibes at this point. And then the only final thing there is uncertainty, which is sometimes people just get nervous about a big job move. So you just need to reassure them sometimes that the company is sound, that the role is sound, and that tips them over the edge. So I'm going to talk really quickly now. Common pitfalls. I've got quite a lot to cover. Common pitfalls: forgetting the main objective, which is to secure your candidate. So don't get too hung up on the detail. Keep the big picture in mind. Be as flexible as you can. Quickest way to turn a candidate off is offering them lower than the advertised salary, or if it's a like for like, lower than their previous salary. As we said up front, in the beginning of the process, make sure you know what your salary range is and state it. And then you've got something to work with. And really what you don't want to do is insult a candidate by offering them much lower than you said the role was worth. And the same goes for changing track from the advertised flexibility, benefits, responsibilities. Sometimes during the interview process, a candidate comes back and says, oh my God, there's another 50 responsibilities that aren't on the job spec. And so that's a shocker and is a surefire way to put candidates off. Being close to suggestions. So I've already mentioned this. Try just to be open-minded. Obviously, you need to be firm on what you think the role is worth and how flexible you want to be. But sometimes a candidate might come to you with a really interesting suggestion. So just try and keep an open mind. Thinking short term, this is just, sometimes people get caught up in the real detail of the negotiation rather than thinking, whoa, this person could be with us 5 years plus. How can we make it work over a longer term? And things like that are, if they're asking for more pay, say, what you say is, well, actually, we can't do any more pay now, but actually we'll do a salary review at your probation period end, and we'll see what we can do then. So that's a sort of a way to move the negotiation forward without committing to anything up front. And as I said all along, not moving fast enough. So then, second from last slide, managing the notice period. So notice periods are getting longer. There is absolutely no doubt about it. 3 months is really not uncommon now, even for relatively junior roles, and 6 months for senior roles is quite common. So you need to just keep that in mind, both for your recruitment process and for this point, once someone's accepted an offer through to start. So it's really important, because what we see is actually candidates can drop out in this phase, even if they've signed a contract, they've signed your offer letter. Actually, if something different or better comes along, or there's a change in their circumstances, we do see candidates walk. So our advice here is, as soon as you've got an accepted offer, just treat the candidate as if they're an employee. Don't file them away and think, oh, great, they're not starting till January or February. Treat them straight away as an employee. So over communicate, maybe schedule a couple of Zoom meetings with them in the next few months. If you've got a buddy system for your onboarding process, then introduce them straight away so the dialogue can start there. Try and build some excitement about things that are going on in the business. Invite them for a visit or two, depends on how long the notice period is. And then share their induction plan, even if it's 5 lines. It just shows that you are thinking about them, you've got a plan, you're professional about it, and it helps build that commitment. I don't know, Jo, you've got a couple of examples, haven't you?
Yeah, so we've obviously seen things go very right and very wrong a number of times, and I just wanted to pluck out 2 examples from businesses that surprised me. So the one example of things sadly going wrong during this phase, nothing else wrong about the process. They'd found their unicorn candidate, secured an offer, secured an acceptance. Everything was going swimmingly. For the first couple of weeks of this 3-month notice period, they communicated well. And effectively, the reason they were bringing this person on was workload. You know, the hiring manager was just too busy. And unfortunately, that presented itself in a drop-off of communication after the first couple of weeks following acceptance. Fast forward to 2 weeks before said candidate was due to start, and the note came through that unfortunately she'd found something else and wasn't going to accept. Through further discussion, it came about that she hadn't heard anything for 6 weeks, had just started to lose confidence, lose engagement. And when another phone call came through, decided to follow up with it. Whereas if that engagement and confidence had still been there through ongoing communication, that temptation might not have overtaken. You know, she may have said, "I'm really sorry, but I've already accepted something else." So it just goes to show how important that is. And yes, it might not be your priority. There might be operational things in the way that are exactly why you're recruiting. But if you can pop in those diary reminders and prioritize them, as Deb said, treat them like an employee. Hopefully you wouldn't stand your employee up for a scheduled meeting. Then just keep that engagement going, keep that communication, even if it's just a quick note to check in on how they are and how they're doing. The other example, which was really beautiful, and I get quite gushing because I'm a recruitment geek, a client of ours found their unicorn candidate on a 3-month notice period. This was in the run-up to Christmas. It was about this time of year, actually. And as a really nice gesture, decided to invite the candidate and their partner along to their Christmas do, which was due to take place about halfway through that 3-month notice period. Said candidate was so taken aback by the generosity, warmth, welcoming atmosphere that she felt because of that invite. She went back and renegotiated her notice period and knocked a month off of it. So ended up joining very soon after the Christmas do. So again, something that didn't put the employer out necessarily. They were having the Christmas do anyway. They saw it as a positive to get to know the new candidate on a personal basis. So a real win-win for everybody there, and just something that businesses might not think about. You know, you might not think about extending that invitation ahead of start date. And it might be a bit scary for the new candidate, to be quite honest, to go in on a social occasion and meet all their new colleagues. In that case, they might say no. And again, don't take that as a lack of interest, but just the fact that you've offered is a really warm and welcoming message.
Absolutely, Jo. Lovely, thank you. So finally, our top tips, just to summarise: over communicate at every stage. Treat every stage as a sales opportunity for the role and your business and your brand. As a starting point, stick to your brief. So all that upfront stuff is be clear what your brief is, but at the end of the process, be as flexible as you can in order to secure your candidate within reason. Be really prompt with decisions. I'll say it one more time. And then welcome him from the start. So just as Jo said, you know, actually some warmth and engagement goes a really long way in this process from beginning to end. So thank you very much for listening. We can move on to questions.
We've already had one through, just picking up on the location of work and the ever-changing demands. So there's a client in the audience who currently don't specify their working from home arrangements in their contract, saying their normal place of work is the office, but they do cover hybrid working separately to make sure that they're not dictating, because they know that one size doesn't fit all. And they think that pinning something down more contractually, I guess, than that might make them less flexible. What are our thoughts? I mean, I know what my thoughts are on this, but Deb, what are your thoughts on that question?
So my thoughts would be, at offer stage, you don't necessarily have to get into contractual detail. So if you say, we have a hybrid working policy, there is a variety of working methods, and we are very open to individuals choosing, and that's a great message. Contractually, I guess I would always, if I was a candidate accepting an offer, I would, if it just said office-based as my location, I would probably question that, because I would say, well, you said you've got a hybrid policy, but it's not mentioned in my contract. So I mean, I would be inclined to say your place of work is split between home and office by agreement or something like that. I'd put that in the contract. Would you agree, Jo?
Absolutely. And I think if you are able to establish what that pattern looks like with the individual, albeit an addendum to the contract or just a separate note on the offer letter, again, just being really explicit with what size does fit them. So yes, you're right, you're entirely right. It's not a one size fits all situation we find ourselves in, far from. But that candidate will only be interested in the size that fits them. So making sure that you've understood, considered and tried to achieve that size if you can.
Absolutely.
Any other questions from anybody else? Everybody's being very quiet.
They are. They're all snacking on their lunch, or they've got us muted.
Or we've just answered everything that they could possibly want to know.
Hopefully.
Well, hopefully you've all taken some really useful tidbits from today. Deb and I and the rest of the team are available and always willing to talk through any issues that you have through our processes or otherwise. You know, we're not just here to talk about the recruitment you're doing through us. If there is anything that we can support you with, then we're always open for a conversation. Any follow-up queries, you can get in touch as well. If you mull things over tonight or wake up at 3 in the morning with a desperate question to ask, then do feel free to get in touch. Maybe not at 3, maybe wait till tomorrow. But thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your lunch, and we will look forward to speaking to you really soon.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.